Hey guys, welcome to harvestingstrength.com. What we're going to talk about today is part 2, training your sprint without sprinting. And what the main topic is today is going to be talking about how to take that strength and to work power movements to elicit more explosive tendencies, which could translate, or rather should translate, to your movements on the track. So the first video, what we talked about was strength acquisition. We were talking about working on hip extension. We were talking about lower limb strength, just all the different muscle groups that were involved to make a sprint more realistic, and as well the hip flexors. And then within that video, we talked about a lot of general movements where it was, the squatting or the box squatting, barbell hip extension, single leg movements. What we're trying to do is we're just trying to build the structure more so probably like an off-season type of mindset. But now what we want to integrate is the power and the plyometrics, because when this all comes into play and you have your structure, which is your body, and it's ready to go into the next phase with the power and the explosiveness, there, from a cellular level, our muscle fibers are broken down into myofibrils, which would then, have the myofilaments of the myosin and actin. And if this sounds like it's way too much, basically what's happening is in the body, your muscles have the potential to overlap. So there's different parts of the muscle, different, thick and thin strands where they can overlap. And how this works is through the presence of a certain energy source. So I'm not sure if you guys are aware of this, but ATP, adenosine triphosphate, when adenosine triphosphates existed, we can create movement. So what happens is in our body, when ATP is present, those thin and thick filaments can overlap and they'll connect and they'll slide. And what happens is when your muscles slide and they shorten, that's whenever we're generating movement. So like when someone does a bicep curl and their bicep looks like it's getting enlarged, in fact, it's not. It's just the overlapping of the thick and thin filaments is giving that illusion that it's getting bigger. But when we do movements, during the desired movement, that's when the overlap will exist, and then it'll shorten. And when we do power and we do explosiveness, the problem with that is during typical strength movements like a squat, the muscles will overlap when they shorten, and then they'll come back and disassociate whenever it's the stretching phase. It's not exactly like that, but we're going to try and make it simple in that sense. But whenever you're doing the squat and your quads are muscles are overlapping to generate the movement, as long as ATP is existent, they shorten and the movement exists. And then whenever the squat, like the descending phase, when the muscle stretches, they're not going to be overlapping as much. The problem with power and explosiveness is it's not a slow movement like this anymore. It's not where you can kind of focus on the movement and the motor pattern is not going to be at a overwhelming level of like velocity and speed. But whenever we're talking about going from like a barbell on the ground to a power clean, which is what a lot of sprinters I would imagine will want to do, work the power clean, we're talking about muscles being at rest to tightening and shortening real quick. That could be a very overwhelming and daunting process for the body. And although it seems kind of simple in the sense that, just lift it off the ground and jump with it and explode, if you look at the cellular standpoint, sometimes those thick and thin filaments won't attach as accurate. So then the contraction can't be as strong as it would be in a slow movement. So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk a little bit more about the cellular level of what's happening with our musculature and how power movements are different than strength movements. And then we're going to give you some examples of some ways to provide power and explosive intervention to continue to elicit growth and development with your sprint without traditionally sprinting. So right here we see a diagram of the muscle fiber. Our muscles have muscle fibers, which are then within the muscle fibers of the myofibrils. And you can see in the myofibril right there, that strand, there's different colors, and those are the sarcomeres that are showcasing the thick and thin filaments of the myosin and actin in between those Z lines. And what happens is when we perform the concentric contractions for desired movement, more times than not, those filament or those thin and thick filaments start to overlap, and that's how we see the muscles start to bulge and things like that, and they look like they're bigger. They're just overlapping. Now you can see at the bottom of this, as this image expands, that for the sarcomere, it's from Z line to Z line, and off those Z lines are again extensions of the thick and thin filaments that are there and present to attach. And then once they're attached, they can start to shorten for movement to occur. But for this to happen, it needs to occur through the sliding filament theory. And how that works is more so big picture. Brain sends a signal. The neuromuscular junction is that signal extended to the muscle. And once that muscle is being told it needs to start movement, that neuromuscular junction sends calcium throughout the muscle, which will allow the myosin and actin to have an opportunity to attach by displacement of the troponin and tropomyosin. But when ATP is present, now the myosin and actin can bridge together and start to slide and overlap. So we've talked about ATP before. When it's present and we have it, we can continue to make movement over and over and over before that ATP is quote unquote depleted. So as long as the ATP is present, they can continue to bridge and slide over and over and over to allow the shortening phase for the movement to occur based off, the sliding movement. Okay, so now we're going to put everything into practice. We're going to talk about these power movements. So before we were talking about strength, but now we're talking about accelerating with the bar. Power is going to be speed and strength together. And the whole point of this is, we work the strength to kind of give ourselves a foundation, like in that off-season phase. But then working the power helps with the acceleration, the speed, and then, just testing the muscles to make sure that we can provide the best and most efficient contractions possible. So we started off with the power shrug. Now we have the power high pull. And the whole point of the high pull is just to, again, re-emphasize triple extension. In case you're not sure of that, that's extension of the hips, knees, and ankles. But what we're working through it here is, the power shrug, the power high pull, and now a hanging component. So when we sprint, the first part of the sprint's going to go from, static to dynamic. But whenever we do the hanging positions like that, the hanging high pull, we're really working on the stretch shortening cycle. So making sure we can load the weight, which is the stretch, and then redirect it into the shortened phase. The flip clean I like is kind of a warm-up. I'm showing you a progression from these movements, and the flip clean just makes sure that we can extend, and then we can get into the rack position. I'm so tight, I can't really get into a good rack position, so I think that's a big downfall of mine, but I'm still trying to showcase this as great as possible. But right now we're going to show the hanging clean. So you do the stretch followed by a quick shortening phase. Again, we're working on making sure that we can get those cross bridges within the muscle fibers to be strong and efficient as well. So the hang clean is working, the stretching and the shortening phase. But then when we go into the power clean, we're talking about sprinting off the blocks, going from static to dynamic. So going from, rest to explosiveness. Right here, boom, we go right into it. And then right here, I don't show it great enough, but I'm trying to show that I like to catch the weight high. And what I mean by that is you see a lot of those Olympians catching the weight low, where they'll catch it and then they're like at the bottom of the front squat. But I like to catch it high because I think that really translates to sprints. So right here, let's look at this. This is a better demonstration of like that high catch. So right here, I'm at a quarter squat position. I'd rather my athletes catch from a high position. So if we were talking about power clean, catch it from here, because that's usually what happens when we sprint. We load the weight, our knees are bent at a quarter squat practically, and then we have to redirect it. So the reason for plyometrics is just to work, body weight, body resistance, and to work on, loading the body, redirecting the body, and making sure that we can be explosive without weights. Well, in this case, using our body weight. So We started off with the depth jump just to learn how to land and stick it. That's something we really need help with for our athletes when they do like the power cleans and Olympic movements. But right here, we're sticking it and then redirecting it. So it's kind of talking about that amortization phase, going from loading, touching the ground, to redirecting and getting that vertical jump. Right here, we do a static box jump. So I'm in a quarter squat position. I'm going to do this again from a higher box to get a better incentive to jump higher. So I'm going to pause and then boom, explode upward. The higher the box, the more extension you'll get. But also what I like about this is when I extend upward, I have to get rapid hip flexion. So I'm working those iliopsoas, those hip flexors to cater to my sprint in general. So I appreciate you guys looking at the video, discussing things with me. If you have more questions, check out my website. Check out my new ebook, harvestingstrength.com, Principles of Programming. Get some more information, discusses lifting and all these other things that have created my business. Again, thanks for your time and hope to hear from you soon.